On this week's episode of the Crowdfunding Nerds, we discuss the art of succinct text, word consistency, rulebook tips, complexity versus strategic depth, steps of understanding your game, and meaningful choices between two options. Let's get into it. Hey folks, this episode is brought to you by Hero Time Manufacturing. That is Hero Time, the numeral one.com. Hirsch Gleck has been a regular on our podcast. We highly recommend his services. He is a man of integrity. Hero Time, they can make anything. They've got competitive pricing and they even do game prototypes. So make sure to check out Hero Time, numeral one.com. A link is in the show notes. And if you use the code Crowdfunding Nerds 101, you can get a 3% discount on your production through them. Let's get back into the episode.
Game begin.
Let's go.
You have my bow.
Am I ad?
That's awesome.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined as mostly always by Sean. How are you doing?
Good day.
We've had some weird technical issues the last couple of weeks, haven't we?
Yes.
Seems as though the former podcasting software that we were using has issues and is still processing the several episodes we recorded. And I don't know if they will ever, come out of the vault. So we're swapping to a different system and using Zoom to record in the meantime. But we're back. This should be the first episode released at 5 a.m. Central Time on Monday morning, so that you can listen to it throughout the week. So, this episode, we're going to get into something that's it's not on the nose crowdfunding, and it's not on the nose of business. It's actually very specific to game development, but I think that it has dramatic impact on your long-term, like your longevity as a business, as well as your ability to fund the most amount of money possible. So this is a very board game specific episode, or tabletop specific, but I'm sure you guys can probably find ways to apply it to other aspects. The topic at hand is that we want to discuss. It's just something that Sean and I are both actively thinking about, which is how to write something in a way that the reader can only possibly interpret it in one way. So you want to kind of get into the background of this a little bit for your how this came up?
Yes, well, we are in the process of setting up an interview with Fantasy Flight Games, and obviously they're a big producer of card games, and we were just noting how there's a real skill by game designers to write game text which is understandable, succinct, and can't be interpreted in any other way. That sounds like it's just an easy thing. Oh, just say this. And I think gamers have a certain vernacular which makes sense in their head, but when other people read it, it's like, what is this, gibberish? I remember the first time I ever, dived into game design, I used the word stat, and like people are like, what does stat mean? It's like, I actually don't know. I think it stands for statistics. It's like, but like everyone kind of knows that these are your stats, these are your statistics, right? These are your numbers in terms of your damage dealing, whatever. But I was like, actually, no one asked me that question before. But it was revealing to me that there's lingo that gamers use that other kind of normie people who maybe don't play too many games don't use or even know. I know that you have a certain philosophy in Deliverance about demons taking damage and not taking damage or receiving damage. You want to explain that? Would you explain to me recently?
Yeah. Yes, it's something that I so in this journey, one of the things that I found is that you need to be very consistent in your language use. So whenever you're writing a rule book or writing text, you need to always use the same key terms for everything. And one of them is if someone's dealt damage. So back in the day with Deliverance, we would, I would say if you're dealt this much damage, or you suffer this much damage, or you take that much damage. And people, if you see two of these cards side by side where you suffer damage and then you're dealt damage, what does suffer damage mean? A player from Magic the Gathering might say, well, suffer must mean that it's unpreventable damage, or that or whatever. And in actuality, the intent of all those three words or phrases are the exact same. You lose health, you take damage, you suffer damage, you're dealt damage. And so I had to figure out what phrase can I use that is consistent across the board, and the player who is the least educated in these types of games would also that the player least educated in these types of games would also understand. And the clearest was you are dealt, 2 damage. And when players, so the way that I would test this is when players would read out loud, they would say, all right, I am dealt 2 damage. They would immediately grab 2 damage tokens and place them on their character just as I intended. And then they would continue on with whatever the rest of the text was. So part of this can be solved by, watching
Playtesting.
players behave and whatnot. But the question that you asked was the difference between taking and dealing damage. And so we on my team, as when it was just me, I was able to write however I wanted, and I got very good eventually at writing in a manner that was consistent with the rules that I kind of made up. But when you put your rule book together and for me, I wrote the rule book. I had somebody really kind of help me write it. But in general, once the rule book was written, everything else I used to kind of explain, like I try to get the card text to explain themselves or to be clear enough that you really didn't need to go to the rule book in order to read, which is another kind of aspect of this whole thing. But then when I added on additional team members, so I have a game developer that works for me full time on our products, and training them was a real eye-opening experience. And when I had, because I have several that are on my team now. I've got one guy that does support and writes story, got another guy that does art and then kind of helps with game development and some design work, and then another guy that is just full-time game developer and kind of social community manager. And so the guy that did game development would always write, he would always kind of commit the same mistakes, the same sins. He would write in a manner that he understood, that was clear to him. Because he always says this character takes 2 damage, and it's like shorthand, like in Magic the Gathering or Pokemon or whatever. You're like, all right, you take 20 or you take 2 or it just makes sense. It's very quick, it's very easy, it's very easily understood in the context of that situation between those 2 players that are playing that card game. And so, but in the context of being written down where the game is instructing you to take something, it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's like, will you take an apple off of the cart? That makes sense. But taking damage doesn't exactly make sense, especially if it's a weird number that's like not listed on a damage token or something. It's like take 3 damage, but there's only 1s and 5s. It's a little bit, it might be straight, or it might be surprising, but there's a little bit more of a gap for people to try to understand what that means, especially if you are dealt 3 damage is on another card that you have in your hand, or that that's on the board, and taking 3 damage is just an inconsistent thing. So the way that I explained it to him that finally got him to like switch was demons deal damage, but take a dump. Oh, it's pretty crass. But he never forgot it after that. So demons don't take damage. They deal damage and take
Maybe some of the confusion with Deliverance is enemies, they damage is added to them, not health is taken away from them. And that might sound like the same thing, but there's a difference where, and I think you intentionally did this for easy setup, where you don't have to put all these kind of health tokens on a monster and then reduce them. In fact, you're doing the exact opposite. You're starting with 0 counters on them, and then you're adding damage counters until they reach their sort of health, and then they are eliminated from the game. So I know that took some getting used to for me, because it's kind of contrary to like a lot of video game ethics, where it's like, I'm dealing this NPC damage and I defeated it. Well, it's it's kind of reverse, where you're adding damage. So maybe that's where some of his nomenclature is coming from, just like traditional video games and other systems. And it makes sense. You want speedy setups, and it'll be a pain having to like set up Deliverance and like all these demons
Add
on
40
this board.
tokens now.
Yeah, if that like add all these tokens to them, so it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it is something that I originally started with the intent of having the total amount of health displayed on the character in tokens, or actually it originally started out in these clips that we would use that we would slide, which I saw there was this game that came out called Wander, the Cult of Barnacle Bay. It's kind of a zombicide inspired game that was in the fantasy genre. And this came out, gosh, it must have been like 2018. But they had a clip with like an arrow that would point to the current amount of health that the boss had. And I thought that was really smart. And I originally went with that. And the way that Deliverance works, you set up like 8 different demons, and you have to put a clip on each one, so there might be 3 clips on a card to track 3 different demons' health. And it became something that was rather unwieldy, just like another thing that players had to do. And if it wasn't clipped tightly, then they would slide, and it just became a kind of a pain in the neck. There were, if it was one of the very limited things that you had to do for enemies, then it might have worked, but there were too many other moving parts that it felt rather fiddly. And so we ended up removing that system and going with here's the total health of the monster. And when you deal damage, you're actually going to add the tokens, because that, as you said, made setup really, really fast. But yeah, there are players that were like, well, I don't like to do it like that. I want to put the tokens on. It's like, okay, that's fine. And they're like, why does this game feel fiddly? It's like, well, that's because things don't have 5 health, they have 20 or 85. Well, it's like you don't really want to add or to subtract health when it's such a high amount. It gets really confusing. It's like, all right, this monster has 198 health and we've dealt it 67 damage. What amount of health does it have now? And it's like, all right, it just doesn't make any sense. But it's like, monster has 4 damage on it. Makes sense. Like everybody understands. So yeah, it was interesting. But then also there are these other little nuances that kind of impact the game, where when you gain stats, when you gain additional health, like maximum health for your character, if you are tracking the amount of damage that you have received from enemies, then adding 1 max health also is equivalent to healing 1 damage. It's like you gain 1 max health, which means that you can suffer 1 more point of damage before you are defeated. And that makes gaining health a stronger thing, rather than tracking the amount of health you have remaining. If you had 10 health maximum and you were dealt 5 damage, you have 5 health remaining. Well, if you gain 1 to your maximum, then you still have 5 health remaining, unless you also increase the amount of damage that you have on your character card as well. So you have to it's kind of a double step, where if you gain 1 max health and you want that to be impactful, you have to also heal 1 damage, which is just another step that you can cut out by doing it the opposite. So one of the things just was one of my big pushes was back in the day was trying to reduce the fiddliness, the amount of times that you needed to touch the things in front of you to do what the game needed, to track what was going on. I tried to minimize that. Hey, Crowdfunding Nerds, if you're looking for an awesome fulfillment partner for US shipping, you should really consider Bridge Distribution and Fulfillment. I personally use them. I've used them for multiple projects. They do such a great job. They also can fulfill Amazon orders and get you prepped for Amazon and their warehousing team. I have been so happy using Bridge Distribution. I'm really proud that they're sponsoring us. If you reach out, bridgedist.com, that's bridgedist.com, let them know we sent you. All right, now back to the show.
I think that's where playtesting comes in. So it becomes so powerful, because those things on paper and theory sound fine, but only when you bring them to the table and you're actually going through the motions of doing those things, actually this is not going to work, because doing this for 2 hours is going to be a pain in the neck. So it's interesting that those things on paper or something. And this actually really impressed me the first time I played Deliverance, because I think my first suggestion to you was, oh, it'd be great if there's like a little slider where you could like slide the damage, and you said, oh, we tried that. It's like, so that actually really impressed me. It's like, okay, well, he's obviously thought about this, and there's a reason why he's done it this way, and understanding that. Uh, so I think that's the benefit of doing lots of playtesting and incorporating these things. But in terms of going back to this ad text and using consistent language that is clear, another thing that I think is an underutilized skill, and this also is applied to your ad text, so there's an element of marketing here as well, is being able to communicate succinctly. So there's a way you can say things where you kind of add extra words and it's not needed. But when you're dealing with a game, you have limited space, you have limited sort of attention as well. So you're trying to communicate in a way that is very succinct. And this also happens with your ad text. You want to try to remove words that repeat, or, what's the kind of like the bare minimum of words I need to communicate the same thing, and that's what you need to use for your ad text, and you use that for your card design or whatever it is. And I think that's very important when crafting your game, is that you master the ability to write very succinctly. Is that something that you've had to practice with Deliverance?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. In fact, right now we're so I'm going through our giant scenario book and giving or just really cutting the amount of necessary language. So, one of the things that people hate doing, they hate reading unnecessarily long text. So just simply looking at a rule book that is 88 pages, it's going to turn people off from ever playing the game. Even if the rule book is filled with gigantic pictures and whatever, just seeing a thick rule book is going to turn people off, or they're going to be like, "Oh, I need to spend, 9 weeks to read this. I'm going to play another game instead." Or whatever.
Have you ever read like an old book where it's like, you can look this up. There's a historical document where at one time the leader of England, Oliver Cromwell, they wanted to make him king. So he wrote a letter of why he didn't want to accept the title of king. And what would take us maybe a sentence or two to say, he wrote like a whole document. And so that's actually a fascinating study on language, of how like it's amazing how like expanded the text is, just to say something that we, in like today in our vernacular, we would literally say maybe in a paragraph. It took him like a whole letter to say. And I think that there's this idea of the past where sentences were very long, paragraphs were very long. There was a lot of this flowery language. Whilst I think as we've gone into the computer age, everything's been kind of made shorter and truncated, and it's a real skill now to try to say something as quickly as possible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I have found, just as a general rule, to reduce the amount of things that somebody needs to think about, what you want to do is write a sentence in a way that uses the fewest number of commas possible. This may seem like common sense, but when you get into the weeds of what it is that you're doing, you're going to you're gonna run into trouble. And so, like, I'll actually pull. Let's see.
So would you like create a sentence, put a full stop, and then just create another sentence? Is that what you're saying? Very short sentences, sort of commas.
So let's say, how about this? I'll just read something that I have amended. Okay, here's a random special rule. Once per turn, comma, when an angel successfully uses a prey action, comma, that player may choose to summon a cruel archer adjacent to their angel in place of one of the standard prayer options. That is a very significantly compounded sentence. That was like the original, we just got to get something down and whatever. So when once per round, when you use a prey action, comma, you may choose, colon. That just makes it very quick and simple, and says, okay, I can do this once around. It's when I use this action, and I can do a thing. What is the thing? And that colon separates thoughts. So the comma adds like extra things to think about. So where once per turn, comma, when an angel successfully uses a prey action, requires the brain to put together those two ideas where it's like I can use a prey action whenever I want, but once per turn, it has special properties. The brain needs those things paired together. And so it's a strange thing where people might not understand if you have more than one comma. Um, so it's something that I had to kind of work out of my system where I would naturally I naturally like to write in a way that begins with almost like reverses the sentence structure where it
Like Yoda.
yes, exactly. I write like Yoda. It's very unfortunate. I learned this in college and I should not have done that. And yeah, the flowery language that I am normally, well, I
I mean,
used to be.
Yoda, you write like.
Yes, yeah. So there's a huge difference between writing technically and writing in I don't know, I guess creative writing and technical writing is how I would separate them. There's a
Yeah.
big difference. Technical writing is writing an instruction manual, and that is what you're doing when you're playing a game. Every single card, every single bit of text is an instruction manual for your opponent's brain. So you really need to make sure that it's written succinctly with as few commas as possible. That's kind of my first recommendation.
Well, if you look at most instruction manuals today, if you go to something like IKEA, there's no text. It's all just like an Egyptian pictogram at this point, with pictures of screws and arrows and things. So I think that shows you something that if you can do it without text, right? Try and make it as clear as possible. If you use text, make it as succinct and as clear and as short as possible. In terms of like language, would you support using language that maybe is like within the theme of your game? So I know, for example, you could say in Deliverance, place 2 demons on the map tile, but you could also say summon 2 demons and put them on the map tile. You could even argue, well, that's a bit more thematically immersive. So would you sort of lean more towards the kind of very clear, unambiguous, or kind of the more thematic immersive text?
Yeah, a lot of people listening to this might have a lot of, especially if you're a game player, designer, etc., you will have a vast knowledge of these things written into your subconscious because of the games that you've played over time. And you might not even realize that there's a difference between place and summon. Place this monster or summon the monster means the same thing, but it really doesn't. To somebody that is not like a hardcore gamer with your experiences, they will need to understand what summon means. It should be defined in your rule book. There may be particular rules surrounding how you summon monsters or whatever in your game versus place the monster in this spot. Like, okay, well, I'm going to take whatever whatever, if it's a standee or a miniature or a token or a whatever that represents the monster, and I'm going to place it with my hand on a physical location. It's much easier to. I use the term grok, which is to understand without actually looking into the rule book. Is kind of how I use that term. You want to be able to grok whatever whatever you're reading without having to also make a trip to the rule book to clarify. Because if you use the term summon in this example, you're going to need it defined. And then once it's defined, maybe you have a section in the rulebook that's like monster summoning or, rules when summoning monsters do this, that, and the other. They should be placed in that location or relative to your player characters, whatever. But once I understand that as a player, okay, I can do that. And I've kind of like memorized it because I do it all the time. It's probably some standard part of how to play this particular game, right? And but it's even better if you don't have to go to the rule book and it's written there for you to just do. Um, that's one thing that I learned with a Deliverance because it's a big game. We use actually I was inspired by Spirit Island for the size of their rule book. They had a rule book that was like 11 inches wide by 11 inches tall, which was about the size of the box for Spirit Island. And it inspired me so much because every other rule book I had seen up to that point was the size of like 8.5 by 11, roughly the size of a typical sheet of printer paper. And I didn't realize, wow, I can actually use more space. So I maximized the amount of space of my rule book, managed to shorten it to like 32 pages. And even though it's like twice the size of, it's literally 11.5 inches square. So it barely fits inside the box, which it's meant to be the very top thing that covers everything else, which is by design, to make, keep components from flying everywhere. And it's not intimidating, but when it was an 8.5 by 11 document, it was 54 pages or 52 pages, something like that, because your rule book has to be in fours. So you have to have a spread, of 4 pages. So it's like 16 pages or 20 pages, but depending on how you do your rule books. But because each single sheet is front and back, and that single sheet gets folded in half. So you have 2 fronts and 2 backs, which is 4 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that was like 52 pages, and it was a doozy for people to look at. They were like, 52 pages, this is gnarly. So when I cut it to 32 pages with my
lots of pictures and graphics in there as well to separate text.
Right. Yeah, it was much more pleasing to read, where they were like, "Oh, this is 32 pages." That was just a number in their mind. This is 32 pages. Might be 32 of the largest pages they've ever seen, but it's just 32. Right. And it's hilarious. It's a huge difference on the brain. And then you open the first page, and then you also see, there are huge examples everywhere because I have lots of room. So that just makes it like a joy to read. It's like those are the types of rule books that I always look for. And I think that what I'm getting at here, going back to this summoning versus place this here, whatever, you want to try to get somebody to go to the rulebook as few times as possible in order to run your game. Everybody thinks, well, everybody's going to play my game like 3 to 5 times and they'll understand after that. And they, in actuality, if your game doesn't have a solid, easy to understand system that allows for the ability to grok information very easily, then your game might not ever get opened a second time. I still have I did as much work as I possibly could in this area, being at the time a first time designer with our first product that came out. And I still had people that were like, "Oh yeah, I played through a first half of a battle and it took me 4 hours," and it was like, "Whoa, that's weird. It never took me that long." But I've played thousands of times and I have no idea what the common person experiences playing my game. So I need to figure it out. So whatever you are thinking as the designer, if you're thinking, I'm going to design games for people with my level of experience, you're probably designing games for like the top 1%.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like one thing I noticed when we went to Strong Tower Con, we played a lot of board games. And a lot of the games we played were super simple. Like we played Heat, and Heat's a simple game. Like it's not, very kind of challenging to understand how it works. It's very simple, but it's still fun. And like you don't need to create this kind of super complex, game that's sprawled across the table with a huge campaign book in order to make a fun game. In fact, a lot of the games I played over that weekend were pretty simple. It's like take 1 or 2 actions, and it's kind of within like turn 2, you kind of know what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I think that's a real skill to create a game that can just be fun, but still simple enough that people don't feel intimidated by it.
Yeah, I think
I know
there's
one thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I know that you mentioned to me with Deliverance is that you took certain lingo that you took for granted, but some players didn't even know what that meant, and it was never defined in your rule book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and how did you kind of rectify that issue?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So I was to your previous point, I was going to say there's a big difference between strategic depth and complexity. Complexity is bad. We want to avoid unnecessary complexity. We want strategic depth. I use the phrase skill floor and skill ceiling. We want the skill ceiling to be high so that players who are really good can express their high level of skill in very difficult situations and feel rewarded for that. But you want the skill floor to be low enough that your newbie players can get in and feel like they're immediately able to have fun and understand and whatever. You don't want your skill floor to be so high that it takes, hours of prep work or several games in order to even understand what you're doing, that kind of thing. But yeah, so to your question, there was this actually shelf side friends of the crowdfunding nerds. I had them review Deliverance, and one of the things, this is back in the day, and I didn't get a rating as high as I had hoped. And one of the reasons was, certain people value some things over others. And one of the things that Daniel really valued was clarity of key terms. And one of them that it really got him stuck. This might have been one of his hangups for why he rated our game a 6 instead of, like, I think on BGG we're like an 8.5 average rating with 800 and some reviews or whatever. But but they rated the game personally for them a 6 because they were trying to understand what angel skills were. So if I say, oh, increase damage dealt by your angel skills by this amount, well, that I didn't realize, but that's a key term that people need to look up in a rule book. So what is an angel skill is what people would ask. And I actually did not define it in the rule book. I'm thinking, like, well, there are skills listed on your character's card. Those are obvious. But then what else could be skills? And there are these additional cards that are paired with characters, which are called talent cards, that are kind of like new abilities or upgrades to your existing skills, etc. And those were also skills. But then you also have equipment, which have abilities on them. And it's like, are those skills? And then you have certain abilities that you might have, like if you're, I don't know, controlling if you're on a pirate ship and you're firing a cannon or something, is that a skill? What is the definition of skills? Because certain cards pair with angel skills, but if I really wanted to use this equipment to deal more damage, is it a skill? If it is, I can combo with this card or that card. It's like they just want to know, what that meant. And because I didn't define it, I tend to actually be pretty good when something's not defined. I make up a rule quick and am off to the races. When something seems like it's getting in the way of the fun, I will cut that thing pretty quick from games that I'm playing, even if it's like a mainstay rule and it's like, you can't do this. It's like, but I want to do it. I'll actually just be like, all right, we can do it for this game. And then at the end of the game, be like, oh, that's why you couldn't do it. I'm much more, I'm kind of like fast, in regard to just quick snap decisions. We're just going to do it this way and move on from this stumbling block. But there are other people that will get entirely paralyzed by the lack of definition, that need you to define it so they can play it correctly. And if they can't play it correctly, they will either interpret it in a way that's like much too difficult, and or they just won't actually move on at all, which is really strange for my personality. I'm just like, go, go, go. Let's not stop experience, let's not stop having fun for a lack of understanding. Let's just make it up as we go. A lot of people are not that way. And they'll just say, like, well, I didn't like this very much because we kind of got stuck here and didn't know what to do. So yeah.
Well, one thing about Shelfside is if you go to shelfside.co/consulting, they do provide a service where they stress test your games, they play test your game on Tabletop Simulator. So I do think if you are about to go to Kickstarter and you want to get some professional, consulting on the mechanics of your game, the clarity, this kind of fresh eye perspective from people who have done this a lot, who would be able to point out a lot of these kind of things which might escape the nose of most gamers, that I would highly recommend that you check out Shelfside's consulting service there. In fact, that might be something that we could do.
Yeah, no, totally. It's something that I actually talked to Daniel about, because Daniel has this keen eye. He's like a major Yu-Gi-Oh player, and the one thing that will help you understand technical writing is playing any long-standing trading card game. Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon are the big three. Now Lorcana, Star Wars Unlimited. There are a number of different, trading card games that are really great. We played Gundam when we were together with Jacob, and so there are these games. The technical importance of things in those games are of paramount importance to being able to play. And even when things are totally clear, you will still have people, because by nature they're competitive games, you will still have people arguing for the interpretation of a card because it happens to be in their favor, or arguing against the interpretation of a card, even if it's quite plain to any third party, because it suits them to have you not defeat me with this overpowered combination of cards. I have to find a hole. I have to be able to poke a hole in it. And so these games will have judges that are kind of the final arbiters of the rules. And the rules, for the most part, are really straightforward and simple. For, I mean, with an asterisk next to that, because these are some of the more complicated rules that are like hundreds of pages if you actually looked at like the rules for Magic the Gathering. But yeah, each individual card is generally only able to be interpreted one way in the way that it's written. So that's something that especially if your game is competitive, if there is any wiggle room in the interpretation of one of the things that you have written, you will ruin people's relationships when they play it together. They're like, oh, this means I get 10 points. Someone else says, no, that means you get 1 point. And it means the difference between winning and losing. And that one person who's a little too competitive at the table just is going to have veins bulging out of their neck and, angry at.
But this is where Reddit comes in handy, where you get these kind of rule, firms. You can just go to Reddit and see what the kind of general consensus is there. So I've done that for certain games.
Yeah, I'll go to a BGG or I mean a Discord server actually. That's like BGG is okay, but Discord is quick where you can get like an instant response. And Reddit is really good for if somebody else has ever asked that question before. Reddit and BGG are both good for that. Board Game Geek for people that don't understand what BGG means. But that company's Discord server will have fans that can answer for you pretty quick.
Yeah.
Anytime I ever play a game, have a question, I ask it, and within 5 minutes or whatever, somebody gets back to me with an answer. So, but yeah, so don't ruin family relationships. Write things in one particular way. One thing that you had mentioned that I'd love to go back to is the idea of I'll say it this way, and this is the way that I would kind of perceive we talked about interpreting rules written on cards and text and whatnot, but I want to talk about like the what is the term? Well, it leads to analysis paralysis, but the human brain can only really hold on to between 5 and 9 things at one time. So if you're asking people to remember that there's this ongoing effect happening in the game and there's some other bonus that they get for, something of that direction, but there's a penalty if they go this direction or whatever, that can really add up when they're also trying to keep in their mind what their character can do or what cards they have in their hand. Each card can occupy one of those 5 to 9 slots that we have in our brain for just being able to operate. As you get more skilled at something, it certainly is like your capacity will increase, like certain things that you just need to remember. If they're a part of every single game, it's like it no longer requires one of those slots to but the thing that I wanted to kind of get into is how adding too many interactions with the board can start to freeze your players and mess them up. The way that this kind of worked in Deliverance. So nowadays, to use Deliverance as an example, when a demon attacks an angel, you figure out you activate that demon, which means that you're going to roll a dice to see what that demon does. You roll a 3 or whatever. It applies to a particular action that says if you roll a 3 or a 4, the demon does this thing. So he's gonna engage the nearest player and deal 2 damage, let's say. So that means he's gonna move the maximum number of spaces that's on his character card. He's gonna stop in his ideal range. If it's an archer, he's gonna stop early. If it's a, whatever blade master dude, he's gonna go right up melee range. And then they're gonna deal 2 damage. And all you have to do is just take 2 damage tokens and place them on your character, and that's it. So what you actually did as a player was you had to look at the character's card. Then you read and you had to roll a dice to see what they did. Then you look back at the character's card to explain what it is they did. You move the character's standee a number of spaces or whatever. You figure that spatial relationships out on the board. And then you instruct the player that's dealt the damage to take 2 damage tokens and place them on their player board. That's actually what happened. And that might happen in a
So there's about 6 steps there.
That's right. And I would actually consider that to be very quick. And a lot of people don't realize that a player taking damage tokens is a step. They don't realize that, looking at the card and activating it and then interpreting what happened with the dice roll, that's 3 steps to but to get the thing to move is another step. And potentially even I would say a half step is to figure out the movement path and whatever. This can all happen within the course of like 5 to 10 seconds, but it's a lot of steps. Now, let's say if I were to add one extra thing, and this is actually a real case study from what we did with Deliverance, I'm going to add dice rolling to see if you hit or if you missed. Okay. So let me explain again with simple, we'll say like a 6-sided dice. A 1 is a miss. A 6 is a critical strike, which will just add a 1 bonus damage, let's say. And then everything else is a successful attack, which deals the standard amount of damage. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I see that it's this, the fallen seraph's turn, whatever. I'm going to look at his character board. I'm going to roll a dice to see what happens. Then I'm going to look back at the character board and say, oh, it was a 3. He engages and deals 2 damage. He's going to move over to the character. Before I can say you're dealt damage, I then have to roll dice to see if he hits. And then I have to look at the dice and interpret what that means. I rolled a 2, which normally is a hit. But is there any bonuses or penalties that might affect this roll and mean that a 2 is really a miss or a critical strike? And then I have to look back at the board, say, okay, it deals 2 damage, but did that dice roll affect the amount of damage that would be dealt to the character? And it's like, yeah, okay, so they take nothing. Or they take 3 damage or 2 damage, whatever. That almost, I want to say it doubles the amount of steps. But then if there are any additional abilities that happen before or after that, or there are multiple abilities, like in Deliverance, you have certain abilities which will activate before that action. So you might have, just by adding a dice roll to see if you hit or miss, you might actually double the amount of time it takes to complete that turn. And what I found in my personal experience is you might actually cause players to get lost, where they all of a sudden forget where they're at and what is to happen next. So it's like, okay, we've figured out, we bumbled through what the fallen seraph does. Where are we? Like, who goes next? Am I next? Or are the bad guys next? Are you next? Like, what's going on? And they have to then reorient themselves. And so what I found was, using, again, Deliverance as the case study, we were able, so when we removed rolling to hit, we actually removed about 20 minutes from an average game. It's probably about between 5 and 10 minutes per player of time was removed to have the exact same experience. And people were actually able to pay attention. And so the longer games were way shorter. And the short games were still short, but the players that were new all of a sudden were able to like run the whole round by themselves without me having to be like, oh yes, now, your character gets to go. Didn't you see? And they're just like, I don't even know where I am right now. It's like,
It was actually quite eye-opening when during the Strong Tower Con that we all went to. Been a part of our next level web team who have nothing to do with kind of games was there. One of our web developers, Alex, and he was his first time ever played Deliverance, and he had no clue what was happening. He's never played these types of games before. It was quite amusing to see, just like that kind of fresh player perspective. But yeah, I think we can take for granted if you've played a lot of games that there's a lot here that just is like a second language to people. And I suppose that difficulty is that English isn't his first language. So he has to do basically two things. He has to try to work out this complex game and then like kind of translate at the same time. So there's even like this double layer of complexity on what he's trying to do. So and he needed a lot of help in terms of okay, you can do this, and he kind of just told us, oh yeah, I want to attack, and then we kind of like okay, well this is what happens if you attacks, and we kind of helped him do his turn. But something to keep in mind is that yes, those extra steps, and then if you're adding another language, if people are they're not fluent in English and they're they have to kind of the complexity of working that out as well all gets added to that equation. So I think that's something really important to think about is what kind of steps do people have to take, or how many kind of thinking states do they have to go through in order to do the action, and that's really going to help reduce that complexity, but maintain that high strategy point, which is what you've spoke about. So I think there's a lot there to chew on, and I suppose this also comes to marketing, right? You want to really reduce the amount of things people have to do to get them to do the thing you want. And we develop our landing pages exactly like this, right? Where we want them to submit the email, and we kind of make that as easy as possible, where as soon as the page loads, they don't even have to scroll. They put their email in, they can submit it, and then they can scroll once, and then look, they can do it again. And we really make the landing page very succinct for that very purpose. And it's the same with all marketing really, is to reduce that complexity and increase clarity. The best performing meta ads that we've ever run always to do with super clear. They're nothing flashy or sexy. There's no sort of magic formula. It's really just what comes down to what is clear and how
help
can
me
you
understand
communicate
what
that
it is, and if I would
as quickly as possible. And that's those usually do the best. So if you can master the skill, it's not just going to help you with your game development, it's also going to help you with your marketing and your crowdfunding. So it's very important that you do think about this and you try to master this skill set.
Absolutely. I think that with our landing pages, which we probably haven't talked about in a while. We could probably do an episode on landing pages and just the logic we've learned since the last time we focused on this. It's probably like 2 years ago we did an episode on landing pages. But the one thing that you just want to give players in games and marketing, same thing. You want to give players a meaningful choice. The meaningful choice is between two options. If you add a meaningful choice that's between 10 options, then find out you can pare those 10 options down to only the most meaningful. So, do you want to go left or right? Is much better than do you want to go northwest or northeast or southwest or southeast or west or east? It's like, please just tell me, west or east, and that's it. Like make it simple. I feel like, there are some scenarios in which you might want to add more than one option, but games in particular are just, in my opinion, boxes that help players feel clever. It's like you want your player to feel clever when they're playing your game. And
Not be clever.
yeah, exactly. It's just that's why Exploding Kittens is so fun. It makes very average, very normal people into funny people. Cards Against Humanity does the same, where you take somebody who has no sense of humor at all and put them into a game like that. They're going to be laughing, because it's their group of friends that makes things funny, or it's their reactions that make their friends laugh or whatever. So I think meaningful choice boils down to one of two meaningful options that if you look back, you could say, I could have gone this route and then this benefit would have happened and that penalty would have happened. Or I could go the route I chose which caused these other things to have happened. And if I can finish a game that maybe I lose a game, and if I can look back as a player and say, well, I made this choice here that was really, I thought, hit or miss at the time, but maybe it wasn't. Then I feel like I need to play again because I could have made better choices and changed the outcome. If I look back at a game and I'm like, there is no possible way, no matter what I did, that I could have changed this outcome, then it's a game that I'm less likely to play again because I feel like it was too random or whatever. So that's kind of the there's this luck versus skill debate, I guess, that you could kind of throw out and say how much luck versus how much skill do you want to have in your game. Chess is a skill-based player will win 100% of the time, and checkers is, well, there's a little more luck involved than checkers, isn't there? So
I don't think snakes and ladders might be the better.
there you go.
Example.
Candyland.
Luck. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, maybe checkers is not a good example because I've seen people like slay.
Yeah, because I beat my wife at checkers every single time until I told her how to play, and then she actually got good. So
yeah. So let's say Candyland, you just or sorry. That's like one of the best games that gives the illusion of choice is Sorry, where you just roll a dice. It just so happens to land on one of your opponent's pawns, and you send their pawn all the way back to the beginning. It's likely to happen because there are a lot of pawns on the board if there are a lot of players, and it's funny when it happens, but it was just total random happenstance. There's zero like agency for a player to actually be skilled at a game like Sorry.
Do you say shoots and ladders? You don't say snakes and ladders in the States.
Well, Shoots and Ladders was like the popular one from, gosh, what was it? I can't remember the company. It's like a very well-known company. And it's like the major toy company from back in the day. But yeah, Snakes and Ladders, I want to say is a brand that, or is a name that I've heard, but it was always Shoots and Ladders when I was a kid.
Okay.
So
it's snakes and ladders.
till you get to the States. To change your diction. So
and Cluedo, it's Clue in the States.
Wow, yes,
Cluedo here. And where's Wally? But where's Waldo in the States? I don't know why they changed things for America.
They changed it to Wally in the States too, but it was always Waldo. Probably Wally is more of a hip name, I don't know.
And I know that the first Harry Potter book was called, the Philosopher's or the Sorcerer's Stone in the States. It's the Philosopher's Stone everywhere else for some reason. I don't know why they changed it. The marketers like, no, Philosopher's not going to work in America. Sorcerer, that's going to sell. Right?
It will. Yeah.
I don't know.
I grew up on Aladdin too, with the Return of Jafar, and he was the most powerful sorcerer / genie, and so yeah, it definitely moved the needle for me in a different way. But yeah, so really, I guess one of the things that we're kind of skirting around this topic, we're kind of fringe talking about some marketing applicability, but the main thing that I really want to the main point that I want to drive home is that if people have a bad time with your game, they won't play it again. But if people have a hard time with your game, they might say, this is interesting, I'll get back to it. But you're going to find that you get a lower rating on Board Game Geek if there are complex elements that require constant references to the rule book or constant trying to decide what this means and that kind of thing. You're just not going to get as high of a rating. You're not going to sell as many units because people aren't going to talk about it as much. People aren't going to say, oh, I love this game, it's super fun and whatever. Like, if you have extra fiddliness or extra unnecessary, I just feel that the height of what your game can possibly be is going to be less than what it could have been had you spent a little more time getting just helping players understand or trying to alter your text, alter your other things to get players to understand. And so in the end, you can have an evergreen product that has a few too many errors. And by evergreen, I mean a product that will sell for years and years and years and power your company for many years to come. that will allow you to make other products and allow you to have a consistent income and all of that, that product, you can only have a product like that if it is, if the fiddliness is minimized. And it might be like Gloomhaven is a very fiddly game, just lots of pieces, lots of bits and whatnot. But I'm sure that even with Gloomhaven, that they were very thoughtful and they worked through a lot of those errors, right? So so I guess if you're making a game like Codenames or an 18 card game like Palm Island or whatever, then sure, your fiddliness should be very minimized. But if you're making this epic space opera that takes 4 hours to play, or you're making some sort of a game that's more techy, there you have more wiggle room and more kind of like those longer, more epic experiences, because people tend to expect that there are more rules to learn and other things like that. But I think that you need to really spend the time in blind playtesting with players. One other thing that really helps is if you ask your play there, they a lot of the time when your players are playing a game, they'll be like, well, what does this mean? And I will ask them to read it out loud. If you read it out loud, then they read it out loud. They will oftentimes understand it. Or what I find is they will get stuck at a particular spot, and it will be your identifier that like, that doesn't make sense to their brain right now. So one of the big problems that I had was the like symbols within the text of an ability itself, especially things that were not necessary, or keywords that you don't realize are keywords, where players are like, I don't know what, move 5 spaces into your armory and draw 2 cards from your barracks. It's like, well, I don't know what an armory is, or where that is, or where the barracks is, and what is the barracks? And maybe the barracks is your deck of cards that's right next to you. It's like, but I need to understand like multiple things in order to make this work. It's like, what is this and what is that? Is what your players will ask. And the barracks, if you just called it your deck, would be way more simple. It's like draw 2 cards from the top of your deck. Is easily able to be kind of grokked, whereas the barracks needs to be defined. So ask your players to read things out loud and see where they get stuck. They're going to get stuck at every symbol, and they're going to call your symbols things that you didn't expect. That will help, like for Deliverance, very common,
book.
Yeah. So you've got your stats, which are your strength, your discipline, and your wisdom. But everyone calls them sword, hammer, and book, or sword, hammer, and Bible. It's like, I deal Bible damage. What's this mean? So it's just your players are gonna, come up with names on their own. So so any final thoughts on this particular aspect, or how, like, why should someone focus on this stuff in your opinion?
Well, I think it's going to make your game better, and you're going to have a better experience. At the end of the day, your game exists for people's enjoyment, that for them to have fun. And if the text is getting in the way of that, I almost feel like a good game or good rules or good card text is invisible. It's like good visual effects. You don't even see them. It's when you start noticing them and it starts impacting the enjoyment of the experience, then that's when you've got a problem on your hands. So I think blind playtesting is going to reveal that. And be careful of solo playtesting. The solo playtesting is great for like the start, but you need to move away from that. And even playtesting with friends and family, you need to move away from that as well. That's all great starting off, and you're probably going to commit a lot of these problems there when you're playing, because you're the human rule book. When you're there with your friends and family, you're playing it with them. But when you get to an element where it's just the rule book and people who've never played this game before, that's the sort of the thing you need to optimize, that experience. So everything else is really just a stepping stone to get to that experience, and to keep that in mind, because you might have a game that, well, this game works really well. I've solo playtested it 1,000 times. Well, that's not the same as playtesting it with people who've never played it, who are just reading the rule book. It's a very different experience. So just be aware of that.
Yeah. There's something that I'm working on. I know you're working on a game as well, which I'm kind of excited about. But the game that I've been working on, this codename Angelcraft, we actually got it to the table at Strong Tower Con, and I had a bunch of people play, and there were a lot of things that I learned. But one of the things was that the way that we kind of used some of the assets for Deliverance because it was, we just had all of them done. It's like, well, let's just use some proxy art instead of doing AI stuff. Let's just use what we have already. So like the card frames and other things like that, we just borrowed from Deliverance for, because it was quick and it would look nice if we did it that way. And I noticed that there were a lot of like visual elements to the graphic design that I felt like they got in the way of the actual presentation of the information. So one of the big things we have on the cards, we had a damage stat and we had a health stat, like the amount of health that you or damage you can sustain before you're defeated, and the amount of damage you deal when you punch something. And there were other stats that we kind of needed to put in there, movement and the range of a character and their various abilities and whatnot. And so the normal, I would say, typical way that you would track health and damage would be like in Magic, you've got a 4/4 with flying, or whatever. That means it deals 4 damage. It can sustain 4 hits or 4 damage before it's defeated, and flying or whatever keywords. But I had my health on the right and my damage on the left of the card. And that's 2 places to look. Whereas if I put them both together, like in the bottom right corner, where everyone expects to see in a trading card game the health and damage, that is much more what players are used to. So sometimes, it was one of my takeaways is sometimes innovating in the where things are located will make them visible suddenly instead of invisible. Good graphic design should be invisible. I should know the health and the damage of this particular character. But if I'm having to look for it, then it's just kind of not doing what I need it to do as a player. And it makes it harder to easily understand for graph. So we're going to be making some adjustments. Also, sometimes our icons kind of got in the way of what the numbers were. So, like the big fat damage icon didn't show the information that a player needed. There was a number right next to the big damage icon that said, oh, this guy deals 2 damage. But it was like a lot of room to just say, he deals 2 damage. We could do like Lorcana, I think, does a really good job with this. They overlay a number on top of a symbol, and when it's really tiny, you can just use the symbol by itself in the text. But the number, with like an explosion around the outside of a number, that's how much damage you deal. And it's very easy when you see a little explosion icon without numbers, it's referencing the damage. So that kind of thing is just, don't try to get too innovative and too crazy with the way that you present things. You should try to present things in a way that players kind of have an intrinsic understanding of where things should go. Because you can have, one player can, for Deliverance, one of the nice things is I can have one player that's fairly seasoned, and then the other people around the table, if none of them have ever played before, including the seasoned player, that is just seasoned in these types of games, that one player can easily help everybody understand every important stat, important thing on the card, because it's where it should be. It's what it should look like. And it's, that kind of thing. It's like, where's the health of this character? It's the big heart right next to, in the top right corner. So it's very straightforward. And I think that is very important. So to innovate too much in the way that something is presented is can end up with a very cluttered and busy design. So
it's something else to keep in mind when designing your components is think about where people are seated around the table. I think this often gets overlooked. So you might have something that looks clear if you're really up close to it. But think about, imagine if you're playing around, 5 players around a table, and one of these components is at the other end of the table. Can you make out what that is? Do you at a glance, do you kind of know what it is generally? I know this is some of the feedback you got with Angelcraft, was that some of the units, when when there's a lot of them on the table, it's kind of hard to know what they are. And one suggestion was that you just had like the unit face, and it's like a zoom up of their face, so you kind of just know, okay, that's like this type of unit, and then all the kind of damage and movement and stuff is like somewhere else on the card. And that would certainly help, like across the table at a glance, knowing what something is. But that's just an example of where something up close makes sense, it looks well, but when you sit at a table with lots of people, and again, this is why you need to play test, because things in theory, things on Tabletop Simulator make sense. Tabletop Simulator, you can just zoom across the landscape and zoom in here, zoom in there. Or you can't do that in reality. You're sitting with physical components across the table. You don't want to have to stand up and lean in. What is that? And then sit back at your table, sit back at your chair, and then make your move. So I think that's also very important to also think in terms of your design, is making things clear at a distance, depending on the size of your game and table.
Yeah, if you can minimize the amount of things that I have to pick up and look at really closely, then it's just going to improve the experience. If I have to look at, picking one thing up is okay, but when I have to pick up like 7 things to figure out what it is that they are, um, it's not something that I might remember after a while. So I'm going to have to do that again. It's like, what's that guy again? What's this guy again? After the, battle has shifted and whatever. I think that being able to reduce it reduces the fiddliness and helps me understand where things are and whatnot. So you're totally right on that. I think also one last point I would make is that, especially if it's your first design, when you play test, for me, the temptation is I'm just looking for people to validate me and what I'm doing. That was what I was doing back in the day, because I thought the game was really, really good. And I'm just hoping that everyone else sees what I see in the game. And when someone's like, first thing out of their mouth is a criticism, sometimes it's quite easy to take that personally, or to do the mortal sin of design, which is defend your idea. Don't defend your idea to people that are trying to help you or that have feedback for you. They'll stop giving you feedback. That's one reason why people will say, "Oh, everyone says my game's great." It's like, yeah, that's because you argue with them every single time they have something critical to say, and so they've stopped giving you critical feedback, or they're too scared to give you critical feedback. You need to give people the permission to shred your idea and tell you how it could be improved or whatever, right?
And then be prepared to do the work, because I think there's another element where it's like, I see what you're saying, and you're right, but that means I've got to gut 90% of my game and basically start again from the ground up, and that's a lot of work. And I think that also catches people, the kind of emotional attachment to the time that they've invested in building the thing that they've done. It's going to be hard when someone's like, yeah, actually this kind of core mechanic you've got here isn't working, needs to be scrapped from the game. And it's easy to defend that. Well, if you've played it 17 times, then it makes perfect sense. Well, people aren't going to play it 17 times. So yeah, that's something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a story that I used to listen to a lot of Ludology, the Ludology podcast, which is about game mechanics and things like that. And Gil Hova, who was a longtime host on that show, he may still be, but I just have listened to less podcasts lately because I drive less, But the he always had this auction mechanic that he would start every single game off with an auction mechanic that he really, really loved, because this mechanism was a really fun thing to play with. And there were like 4 to 6 games that he designed with this mechanism as like the core mechanism. He ended up cutting the auction mechanism from every single one of those games that were all successful. And it became like a legend of the auction mechanic in his games. They don't exist. So, but hopefully you guys have found this episode insightful. Hopefully, it helps you design better products and make more money when it comes to crowdfunding. The more interesting your product is from the get go, the easier it is to get into, the more successful you'll be in the long run. So, with that final thought, let's have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.
Hey, Crowdfunding Nerds, it's Andrew Lowen, and I wanted to introduce you guys to the Crowdfunding Nerds Academy. If you don't know, we have a do-it-yourself course system that will teach you how to build, excite, and prepare a crowd to fund you on your launch day, and that is our goal. I have used these systems to help raise over $30 million for tabletop campaigns, over 200 tabletop crowdfunding campaigns since 2019. I've generated over $100 million through e-commerce sales using these processes. These courses teach you how to replicate our results. They're made for the small creator. Over 150 of those people were first-time creators. These courses contain hundreds of hours of podcast discussions and tons of details that are almost impossible to find on the internet. And they have been distilled into concentrated courses that you can absorb quickly. They are designed to generate results. We hold nothing back. Visit crowdfundingnerds.com/academy to learn more, or just Google search Crowdfunding Nerds Academy.